if I may say so. Here we are going to talk about people, more in terms of people. The reason is fairly simple. What we've been talking about over the years, over the centuries rather, is what we termed as the hydraulic civilization. And that is where it all started. Civilization where people were dependent on water for everything and anything. And as we move forward, it apparently seems that water is now being considered in two ways. In a way where we are coming up and saying that we should take advantage of it. And of course, we also have the negatives of it, where people are under crisis. There were quite a few questions, even prior to this session, where we were asking our panelists with regard to what is being done with regard to people per se. And this is where we start and we discuss. On top of that, may I also add here that when we talk in terms of the third space, which is one of the major focus of this conversation that we are having, I guess we cannot avoid but to discuss people. I personally call these people floating community, and I've been involved with this floating community for quite some time. And the two gentlemen sitting next to me are individuals who I believe, and I've gone through sort of what they've been doing on these floating communities. And I think their personal experience will tell us even more in terms of not just looking at the macro level, but looking at the ground level. Because for me and for all of us sitting here, we've come here not to come up with certain policies, but to ensure how human beings can live better. That is perhaps our ultimate motto. So keeping that in mind, I will definitely, let me start off with Mr. Sanjay Hazarika, sitting on my left, and tell him to relate his stories, his experience for us, so that our policies are directed to people rather than to merely businesses or making money or governments to use it for political advantage. So over to Mr. Hazarika.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, greetings to everybody and thanks to the organizers. As Vikram pointed out in his first remarks today, the old African saying, all protocols observed. I don't have to name everybody. I've just come back actually from traveling on the river in Upper Assam. I spent about 6 or 7 days there and also in both in the Brahmaputra, on the Brahmaputra and the Subansiri. Not at one stretch, but in, I'm sorry, not at one stretch, but at different stretches, and also in the Pagdadia. And it's a kind of renewal for me because I've traveled on the river from Tibet to the Bay of Bengal in different stages over different years. And it's perhaps been both an inspiring and challenging journey, but it's also been the most enriching, one of the most enriching experiences of my life to have traveled there and experienced the warmth, the hospitality of people, and the amazing challenges that people handle on a daily basis. And one of the things I did want to say before I get into some of the nitty-gritty is, you know, some of us, Mr. Besbarua, I think Partho and other friends here have been involved in this low-key policy, Act-East policy. We've seen it involve Ambassador Bhatia over the past 20 years. And actually to see it beginning to happen is something which is incredibly inspirational. You know, even if it's at this level, at conversation, this wasn't even taking place earlier. So it's quite inspiring to see this happen, that there is a community of spirit and a community of politics which drives it. When we talk about the Brahmaputra, people think of it as one river, but as Partha knows and some of us who've been traveling, it's just nearly 50, there are 50 rivers which pour into it. and one would not call them tributaries because you don't pay tribute. These are rivers of their own, and as Jayanta Bangopadhyay says in one of his papers, a great hydrologist here in Calcutta, that in the summer, in the monsoon, when it floods, there are 5,000 rivers. That's the scale of water levels and of flooding. Now, when I traveled on the river, for those of you who have traveled on the river, you will find that it is, of course, a great river. It's magnificent. It's also intimidating. I go out on these small boats, and the boat is about 30 feet long. You have a life jacket, and you go out on this country boat which is sputtering away, and you go out of the ghat because there are no ports in Assam. You go out of the ghat and you swing into the main channel. And the main channel is like 3 kilometers that side or 2 kilometers that side. And you think, what on earth am I doing? You know? But it's a good lesson to us to be humble and about ourselves, because there are entities, as the Supreme Court in Bangladesh has said, there are living entities which are greater than ours. Now, the river is becoming shallower in Upper Assam, in Lower Assam, in Bangladesh. That is a visible new characteristic. The Brahmaputra is one of the greatest sediment carriers in history. Yeah, only the Yangtze Kiang, I think, in China carries more sediment than the Brahmaputra. It's a bigger river. And if you look at satellite imagery of the Bay of Bengal, you will see the alluvial fans of the Brahmaputra stretching out towards the Andaman. It's a river that is building the continent. It is building Bangladesh. It is creating more space. But if you go upstream towards Arunachal and move down, you see that the river and its other allied rivers, its companion rivers, are getting increasingly silted and shallower, getting broader and shallower. And nobody seems to know quite why this is happening. But what does it do to people? Because when the river becomes shallower, it also begins to erode more sharply. So I was traveling on islands. Now, some of you may not know this, many of you will. The Brahmaputra is home to a unique ecosystem. There are something like 2,500 islands on the river. 2,500 islands on which 30 lakh people live. That's about 8% of Assam's population lives on islands, right from Lakhimpur in Dhemaji to Dhubri. And these are extremely vulnerable communities, not just vulnerable to floods and erosion, but they're also vulnerable to health and education issues and so on. So the double whammy of geographical and social exclusion. Now, when you go on these islands, you don't feel you're on a large island. You don't feel you're on an island, because you'll see farms, glowing green rice fields. You'll see coconut trees, mango groves. There'll be animals, and the people on these islands have essentially livelihoods from three things, three kinds of livelihood, income generation. One is agriculture. The second is fishing. And the third is animal livestock. So it can be piggeries, it can be cattle, cows, or buffaloes. But what happens when the river floods? When the river floods, many people move to higher ground. When they go back to the island may not be there, or it may not be there in the shape that they left it. So when people get displaced, they lose, a little bit of life and of hope. So what is happening on the islands that I visited this time is that many people are leaving because they can't cope with the stress of losing a part of their lives again and again. Sometimes they lose their homes 3 times in a year during the flooding season. And I think this is important for us to understand, because in the amazing projects, programs that we've heard all through the day, people also matter. So if people are moving away, you take these islands are called SORs or saparis, they're temporary creations. When people move away, where do they go? They go perhaps to another island or they go to the mainland. And they go to places where they're not perhaps comfortable, where they're not welcome. And it's very painful for them to move like that. And when I was talking to the village communities in these five districts that I traveled on to, everybody said the same thing. They said that we are happy here. We lose the land, we suffer a lot, but we don't depend on anybody else. We are self-sustaining, we are self-supporting. But because of the erosion, they are having to move. So the number of internally displaced people in the region is growing. So, and I was in this community called the tribal community, Mishing. It's called the Mishings, and they have this indigenously designed houses. You will find them also in Myanmar. Uh, yeah, the what's called the Changwa in Assam, which is essentially that you have these houses on stilts. And this is designed hundreds of years ago. It's been improved with time. So that when the flood waters come, it doesn't reach their home. And if it's damaged, it's made of bamboo, so you can dismantle it, take it away on a boat, and maybe rebuild it. And I had gone to this village, and one of them said, "Will you come to our home?" So I said, "Yeah, sure, go to our home." And they gave us this. You walk up to the Changar, and they gave us this very wonderful. You're sitting inside, and you walk inside, and it's spongy because everything is latticed, and so it's spongy and it's airy. It's cool in May in Delhi. I know it's 44 degrees, but in that village on the island in the Changbar, after 2.5 hour boat ride and a 2-3 kilometer walk to the village, it was cool. And then they bring out these bowls of what's called sai apong, sai, which is apong, the rice. And it was so delicious, along with a meat curry. Somebody's home in the kitchen. And I thought to myself, because I thought Ashish Phukan was coming and he was going to be talking about, the wonderful work he and his wife and his company are doing on promoting river tourism, is what we need is off-circuit tourism. We need off the road, off the river, off-circuit tourism, which involves communities, which involves people, like that. They have very little incomes, but if they're able to keep people in their homes, develop one of the homestays, a very simple thing, without much ado, without much fuss, you'll have a sustainable model of actually promoting a livelihood which will give them an additional income during a time of deep stress. And I'm sure that both in Bangladesh and other countries, there are opportunities like that which we can all learn from. Uh, and it's a process that protects people. It gives them an income at a time of need, because the flood times are times of hunger when there is no income for people. It's also a time when people feel um, they're deeply challenged because they have to go and live in a relief camp. Everybody has a sense of dignity. You lose that sense of dignity when you're depending on a dole. So I think this is really the people to people connect that we need. And I just threw this idea out to them and they liked the idea. So you need something like backpackers, you need some, shall we say, virtuous tourism that will take care of some of these ideas, scientists, researchers, other people to go in there, not the usual sort of people who go and tourists will go and play loud music and, make a nuisance of themselves. So those were some of the thoughts I just wanted to share. As the conversation grows, we can take it on.
Thank you so much. Let me add to what you just said. This was last year. And last year we were also, of course, in Bangladesh, you have these floating communities as well. And when I say floating communities, they're not just homes, they're farms, they're gardens, they're floating bridges, they're floating dams, name it, floating solar stations. So it goes at that particular, floating hospitals, floating hotels. These are all really floating. And mind it, this is one of their livelihoods they're very proud of. So I was discussing this, and I knew that there were people who were also doing the same thing in India and other countries as well. So I was having a discussion with the World Innovation Network, which is in the US, Chicago. I was talking to the president. And this year we were supposed to do it. Unfortunately, because of the COVID, things have gone, actually, we are taking it up for the next year. They wanted to see it because the world wants to see what may happen to the entire world as the global warming takes place. What initiatives can be taken? How can we actually use technology to ensure that they have better lives? So these are the areas that we need to look at. Innovation will take place at that particular level. So let me again move on now from here to Mr. Ulatan, who also has his personal experience and will be sharing his story with us. And I'm sure all of us will learn quite a lot from it. Over to you, sir.
Okay. Thank you for all of you, because this is the last session and then the last panel. So you are having here is thank you very much. So I'm from Myanmar. I'm from Myanmar, Burma, former Burma. So I live in the Arkan state. It's a city called the Sitwe. I was born in there. So this is located in the mouth of the Kaladan River, the Bay of Bengal. So I was born in Bay of Bengal, mouth of the Kaladan River called Sitwe. This is my native. So in Arkanese language, our language, the Kaladan River, we call that Gispan Nadi. And everybody called in our area, never called Kaladan River, we call Gispan Nadi. Kaladan River is a map in writing by the English, British, they write Kaladan River, but we call Gispan Nadi. So this is about my native in there. So when I was young, so after heavy rains in the rainy season, river carries a lot of, the fallen tree, big logs and branches of the tree and bamboos. So we collect all those things from the river for our firewood, for our cooking. So my mother ordered to go and collect the firewood for the riverside in the rainy season. This is as usual. So we are going there and collecting the wood from there. So one day I asked my mother, where are all those wood from there? So who owned that? The very curiosity in my childhood to know about which this wood is where I'm from. So my mother answered that. She answered me, allow the river or the natural resources owned by the people. So nature gave us, that we share each other for the natural resources from the river. So I asked again to my mother, where it is from? So my mother answered me, there's a mountain area from the Himalaya. Himalaya is very familiar with my childhood because we have a lot of story telling about the Himalaya. If there's something biggest, we always compare to the Himalaya. So for example, my mother asked me, do you love me? So I'm asking big love, how much big? Big as a Himalaya. So Himalaya is very familiar with us for the biggest sample. So this is the one. And then I asked the country of the India. So my mother told me that country of India, this or the river or the water or the firewood come from the countries of India. This is my childhood area, maybe each of 3 or 4. Long history, and then my mother told the long history and big country in the Asia called India. So I'm in my life the past and the earlier to know that another country is India. So this is my life. I know that another country in my life, this is India because of the river. River carried all the firewood for us. This is from the India. So this is in my life. So for the Riverine community in the Kaladan, the Gispan Nadi, People allowed live in the there. Today I will going to more focus about for our people who whatever they are concerned, what are their reality in the there. Maybe a little bit of the story, but I will tell you all of you about for the real situation in the around the Riverine of Caladan, what happening with the people. This is very important to know. If you don't know about the reality of there, you may think about whether everything is easier or everything is going smooth or something like that. But actually, in our country is for the time being very situation is very confused and very how can I say the complicated situation. So all around the river of Caladan is very complicated situation now. So actually the people live in the river of the Caladan. They are very agriculture from their food. And then fishing for their kitchen, weaving for their clothes, blanket, and shelter for the local material. So their living style is very simple. And this is allow the river, they are not very populated. One village to another village is far away. So they are very isolated and not populated. They live with a very simple style of living with their own living style. But this is another one thing is that this came from the Mizoram state of India. The transportation are not really good to the Mizoram side. So all the riverine peoples are live along the river. They go down to the south side, not the north side. North side is very difficult to go up to there at the time. So maybe 3-4 decades, they are never changed in that area. All the people of Riverine in Caladan never changed 3 decades. The last 2 decades, they are changing. 2 things is happening in there all over the world. This is motorcycle and handphone. They start to use the handphone, and for communication, they use the handphone. And they start to use the motorcycle for roadsides. Actually, this is a river is very good for transportation, but the people going along the river is having the boat is very expensive than if compared to the motorcycle. So they made the small road allow the river size, and then they're using the motorcycle for their transportation. So that 2 decades ago, they started using motorcycle, and then the cell phone make them different kind of thinking and way of seeing. So they're more thinking about for the meaning of life. They're more thinking about for their daily life. They are more criticizing with themselves for their life. So, and they get the contact with the cell phone to the other city, other country, other people. So they are more and more getting, compared to the other people live in the city, other people income. So they want, the young people, especially young people, they want to leave the village and they go abroad for getting more money and searching for the money, something like that. So in the, what happened, consequence is that this is especially all the young people from the village side, they are going for the town, city, maybe another country for they are getting money to buy the motorcycle, to buy the cell phone, or maybe to increase their building or whatever. So they go there. So the agriculture, actually originally the agriculture is their just sufficient for their own food. And a little bit extra, they sell it. So this is the kind of situation in the previous 3-4 decades. But nowadays, they are a lot of, the human resource called like young people are not in the village. So the harvesting time or the pedal time, they are very difficult for the labor for field. So the parents are selling the pedal field. So the more shrinkage the area of the pedal field. So agriculture are also go down. And fishery also they are very early time they use for the normal the traditional the fishing net or blah blah blah. Nowadays the people come from the southern side, they go up to there and they are using a lot of modern fishing material. So the local riverine peoples are getting fishing more and more, less and less. So they are trading, they are economy, they are living all the things is a very difficult situation right now. So this is a reality happening in the riverine of Caladan along the river. But at the time, the Indian government arranged for the one big project for the Caladan River and to the Mizoram and to connect to the Seven Sisters state from the Calcutta. So that will be very coming soon to the happening in there. So one thing is we have to consider about for the local people. The project is good for the local people, definitely good. But one thing is that we be careful about for consider of before the project starting, we have to prepare with the people who live in that area for more strength than for the thinking, like a kind of their living idea, whatever. So this is a kind of what I want to tell in the here. Both focus for the people right now in there is, for example, just an idea. There are a lot of things to do with the people, but all the things are not the big things. All the things are small things. We can easy to start. For example, nowadays that they want to having the boat for the going along the river for trading or whatever they are going there. So one thing is the having the owning the boat is very expensive right now because they are building boat by the metal or building boat by the wood. Wood is a timber is also expensive. So nowadays they are not having the boat. Instead of boat, they having the motorcycles. So they are not using a lot in the river. They're using on the road. So if you use the motorcycle, also we have to buy the petrol from the other area, not local. So all the money is going to the petrol. So maybe some percentage of money is going to the petrol, origin of the petrol in there. So my idea is a fiber boat. Fiberglass boat is a very lighter and materials are not very expensive. If they're starting with something kind of idea for the small size, medium size fiber boat and not using the engine. If you use the engine, you have to buy it again for the petrol for engine. So why not we use like a kind of electric, feeding solar motor, so solar station, so the motorboat can fill the electricity from the solar. So this is the kind of we are thinking about for the future. But people live in there, if they get the having boat by the affordable price with the boat and without buying the diesel, that would be the best for them to trading. So that kind of small idea. Another idea is they are living in there. We have a lot of things to do, organic farming. Maybe they are nowadays the telephone repairing, the small things. All the small things is a very, very easy and possible to start in that area. So like a kind of, solar power technician and motorcycle repairing, and then introduce of the sustainable fishing idea, technology, and then another farming agriculture, fish-based farming agriculture, and visit finance training something like that for the village. So actually my idea, before start the big project through the Caledon River, Slipway, Palawa to the Mizoram, they are carrying the things by the very big container. They carry in there. Before starting the big project, we have to prepare with the people in there to develop their own way, and they are developing with their livelihood and everything as much as possible to start from the small size. This is what I want to share. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I mean, you see, small is beautiful. We know, however, that financing small projects at times are not necessarily feasible. And this is where collectivism comes into force. Can we do it collectively? Not just in one single country, but in combined countries. And we need to look into that. Technology is something that has already been used by these innovations. And mind it, all of these things are being done by them, not by us. And that is the beauty of it. How can we make it more productive is a question that we need to ask ourselves. Before, how much time do we have?
So I think one or two questions.
One or two questions. I'll get into the questions a bit later. Just to highlight it for one more thing, because I was talking about the health sector. And of course, you wanted to share something in the health sector that you're doing. Would you like to share that now? Yeah, please do.
Many years ago, I was traveling on a ferry from a place called Nimati in the Jorhat area of Assam, Middle Assam, to the Majuli, which is the largest river island in the world. And we heard the story of a young woman who died in childbirth because she couldn't get to a hospital on time. That set me thinking about looking at issues of maternal mortality in Assam, and to my horror, I found that Assam had the worst maternal mortality ratio in the country, which was that more women were likely to die of complications during delivery than from any other cause in rural areas of Assam. And that's also the time when I researched a bit further to find that 1/10 of the population of Assam, now it's 1/8, lives on islands. And there's very little access to health and education. And I thought about it and I said that, in Assam, we pride ourselves, we say that women are at the top there. There's no gender discrimination and so on. But this sort of thing was happening. So over a period of time, I discussed with people at the village level when I traveled and so on. And obviously, you can't build bridges or build roads everywhere or have helicopter services like plane services like the flying doctors in Australia. But so I thought that why not? The woman died, this young woman with a complicated pregnancy. She passed away because she couldn't get access. She didn't have access. The point is, they were going for the service. So my thought was the service should go to them. So I designed this boat clinic, which with some advice from MIT Design Cell. And we rolled it out and we won an award for it. We rolled it out in 2005. Very initially, I wasn't sure whether it will work or not. Today, we have 13, we are working in 13 districts with 15 boat clinics and reach 2.5 lakh people. But that is entirely possible because the government of Assam has supported us solidly since 2008, the National Health Mission, and particularly the Chief Minister, when he was Health Minister, has made this a priority. But, this was just an idea. I didn't know if it would work, but it was an effort that was worth the risk and the gamble, and it reaches 2.5 lakh people every year. We do something like nearly 300 medical camps on different islands every month. So that's how it was.
If I may add, I mean, we have this, what we call the Friendship Hospital, which is again a floating hospital, and it has been operating for the last decade or so. So these are certain initiatives that I think that we can not only work on, but we should be very seriously researching on these. How can we bring them under one platform? That by itself is going to give the world a story, not to tell, but to actually work on. Before I end, if I have any questions first, do we have any questions there, please? Yes, at the back. Could we have a microphone? Please do.
Okay, my question is to Mr. Hazarika. He talked about the healthcare, and he also talked about the fact that we could have something in the field of tourism, so that these changes that have been brought about by the river could be mitigated to a certain extent. My question is, I'm a little ignorant in this, because if the Brahmaputra is getting braided and it's actually eroding the banks, and obviously then a lot of land is being lost, or people are being displaced, then isn't there a scientific methodology which can be adopted to make sure that it does not deteriorate, the situation doesn't deteriorate further? Or is that simply something that nothing can be done about? This braiding of the river which is happening. What is your experience with that?
Well, I think the professor has, he's also studied the issue quite extensively, so he would know. There are interventions both in Bangladesh and now in Assam of new technologies to try and protect the banks from eroding. But then there's engineers have to take a choice. During this recent trip, I've been talking to a lot of the water resource engineers in the flood department. They have to make a choice about which bank to protect, because sometimes the water will come and hit here and then go to the other. So you have to mitigate the force of the water so it doesn't go and hit the other bank. And it's fairly complex, because the river not just is braided, it also has different paces. It flows at different speeds, and it's coming down a hill. Actually, the valley is like this as it goes down. So we can have mitigation, and there is this new geo tube and geo bag process which is being used quite extensively along parts of the Brahmaputra. But it's difficult to do it. It's very expensive and it's very, very tedious work. The river brings down more sand and silt than the system can cope. Then even it is unable to cope any longer. Earlier it was just wash it down and drop it. Now there's so much siltation from even an early higher up in the where it comes down the hills that it's difficult for the river to sustain itself. But and some of the old technology is still being used, what are called porcupines and all that. But this is an effort that's ongoing, and along with dredging and all that. But it's not as easy as it sounds. It's a very complicated and complex entity with a very difficult mind of its own, which is difficult to fathom. And it changes, it changes stream. I mean, it will you build something here and it goes somewhere else.
If I may also, yes, please.
Area, isn't it?
You went up to,
Yeah.
that's a Janu Barua one, then it's right up to Tibet. It's the Gautam Barua one, then it's to Geling.
No, so that movie. So I'm interested to know about that part because when we talk about the Brahmaputra, it's always about the valley. So we don't talk much about the Tuting, Geling, Singha axis and how difficult life is it when the watershed of the Sangpo and the Brahmaputra meet. So I'd like to hear a little bit about it from you. Thank you.
I don't know how much time there is because I know there is it'll take a little time.
Sorry. I mean, but of course, but this has to be a very interesting story, and we can definitely spend a lot of time on that. Saying that, but please bear in mind that when we talk in terms of these small projects, financially they may not be feasible individually, but collectively they are. So we need to look into that. The second is, of course, it's quite clear, loud and clear. These are expensive interventions that we are talking about. We cannot do it alone. And we've got to do it together. We don't have a choice. Third, and lest we forget, there is a saying that the Third World War will be on water. And we, as a nation, together, I'm talking about the subcontinent, India, Bangladesh, together, we are sitting on the largest water resource of the world. And we're doing absolutely nothing about it. So we've got to ask ourselves this question. Should we continue with what we are doing or think differently? Let me end by quoting from our father of the nation, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. And I quote, he said, the people of this riverine country would never find it difficult to fall asleep on a boat because that is their home. Unquote. And let us all understand this very clearly. We're living on water. We have to thrive on water. And we've got to tell the world how to take these things forward. That should be our motto. And that is the reason why I feel this conclave, this conference that we are having is extremely relevant for us. My father was born in Silchar. My grandfather worked here. I live in Sylhet. And right a couple of weeks back, my home was underwater, totally underwater. It was not a river, it was a sea. But should we surrender? Let us not. So let us work with the people and find out what people are doing, learn from them, use those innovations and make it effective rather than import things from abroad and take it forward. Thank you so very much for your patience. Thank you, panel members. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Professor Anwar. Thank you to the panelists, Professor Sanjay Hazarika and Ulathan. May I just take this opportunity to felicitate our panelists and the chair on behalf of Asian Confluence. May I request Professor Sara Hilali to come back again on behalf of Asian Confluence to felicitate the dignitaries on the dais. Thank you. This time, yes. I don't want to repeat the mistake of the last time. Can we actually have a group photograph? A photograph speaks louder than 1,000 words, as people say. May we preserve this photograph for posterity? Thank you so much, sirs. With this, we come to the end of the first day's academic session. May we give ourselves a round of applause.